thank you for having me. And there's a lot of points I'm going to jump off, so thank you for that. I'm going to speak tonight a bit more philosophically about the idea of a basic income and leave the details and mechanics to the Q&A. But I'd like to put forward two general thoughts. I'll start by talking about why I'm so excited about the idea. The obvious thing for those of us on the left, I think, is the potential to combat the brutalizing effects of poverty and the social determinants of health, and what such a policy says about who we are as a society and caring about the well-being of others. But I also want to speak to its radical potential, its potential to wrestle us out of our slumber and challenge some of the underpinnings of the neoliberal ideology that holds so much sway today. I think it's a potential antidote to what the economic historian Karl Polanyi described as our move from a market economy to a market society, whereby everything is viewed through an economistic lens. But secondly, I'm going to highlight some reservations I have about the idea and the movement behind it. I think the push for a basic income is not necessarily progressive. Indeed, I fear it could be used both to smash what's left of our welfare state and further entrench a hyper-individualism that spurns the richness of community and public program and blunts the potential for the kind of collective projects that social democrats like myself see as valuable. There is a reason many of the guaranteed income or basic income proponents are on the right, whether it be free market libertarians like Friedman or Hayek, or really principled communitarian conservatives like Hugh Segal in Canada. And I will argue that the basic income, like Sheila said, it must be a basic income and I will explain that more later. I will conclude by explaining why it is that in this critical election year, and I want to stress it is a critical election year for all of us in this room, we at the Broadbent Institute will not be advocating for a guaranteed income, but for policies we think can alleviate poverty and roll back inequality in the near term without losing hope of a guaranteed income in the longer term. This tension between a more radical future and a practical progress now is, of course, a central question that has plagued the left since at least Marx, but that tension is a topic for another day. So I'll start with the good. I think a basic income is a no-brainer if we're talking in terms of tackling the scourge of poverty. Our current welfare system, as you explained, provides meager and stigmatizing benefits that leave recipients well below the poverty line. It also creates what is known as a welfare wall, since recipients lose their benefits almost entirely if they take a job, even if it's low paid or insecure. What is so compelling about a basic income, to me, is something different. It is its ability to get us to see and think differently about work, about what we value, what we aspire to, and ultimately how we spend our days. It exposes, I think, some damaging things we take for granted. And as the great social theorist Michel Foucault made clear, it is the unchallenged status quo, those background elements of prevailing power dynamics that are not even questioned, that are often the most pernicious. I think many here would agree that there is a worrisome culture in our society around work, around being busy constantly and doing, irrespective of the ends or the impacts, whether they're social, ecological, or what have you. The great Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, warned of the rise of a sort of instrumental reason in our culture, the kind of rationality we draw on when we calculate the most economical application of means to a given end, the maximum efficiency, the best cost-output ratio as our only measure of success. He pointed to ways that demands for economic growth, for example, are used to justify unequal distributions of wealth and income, or that the way those demands make us insensitive to the needs of the environment. Earlier I referenced a historian, Karl Polanyi. One of his key insights was this idea of fictitious commodities, that we consider land, which ultimately is the natural environment, labor, which are human beings, and money as commodity, as inputs that you can put into an economic formula, when of course they're not. We are not commodities, and that is a fiction. Labor are human beings that need to eat, sleep, and I would argue learn, flourish, sing, dance, and love. We are in short not just workers. And the basic income idea lays this strange obscurity bare. It reminds us of our humanity. This brings me to the idea of creativity. Because a basic income takes away the need for someone to enter the labor market and take a job they have no interest in, it means it provides time and space for people to dedicate their creative energies. That could be to volunteering, it could be to childcare, it could be to music, it could be to art, and on and on and on. It could be maybe even thinking and having time to build a resume, or to think about what job in the labor market you'd be good at and actually chase it. I think here of many of my friends who are in the creative industry, in the arts and music, and are forced to work in service industry jobs just to meet their basic requirements. I'm sure each of you can conjure moments in your life where you took a job you didn't want out of necessity. I think about when I finished my master's and ended up working at Indigo Books, and could have been spending that time writing, because at the time I was an aspiring journalist. And then I think about how many people would leave their jobs, precarious, low-wage jobs, tomorrow if they knew that the basic needs of life could be met. In fact, this raises interesting questions around the law of unintended consequences. Would a basic income lead employers to actually raise wages to attract labor? Or would it let them off the hook and be able to pay lower wages, thinking that the taxpayer would pick up the tab with the basic income? I don't know the answer to these questions, but I think we ought to be asking them. So let me recap where I'm at so far. I think there is definitely a need, if we want to meaningfully address poverty in a simple, direct way that is not stigmatizing, to have a basic income. And I think there's a further need for it as we drift further and further towards precarious work. And finally, I think there's an opportunity for us to open our minds and to challenge what the incredible foreign minister of Greece right now, who if you aren't following, you definitely should, he's a very compelling character, but what he calls the toxic propaganda of neoliberalism. That is, our ability to challenge the idea of labor, of our work, as a mere commodity, and our drift towards a market society. But now I want to talk about my reservations. I've just told you I think a basic income is inspiring in its radicalism, that it has the potential to challenge some of the worst aspects of this economistic thinking. But I also fear its realization could be taken in a decidedly non-progressive direction. My fear is that it will be used by the right wing, by thinkers and columnists like Andrew Coyne, to hack and bash away at the progressive state. And underpinning this fear is that the basic income rests on a somewhat problematic idea of the primacy in all instances of individual choice and buying power. What do I mean by that? I mean the concept of giving a check to everyone could reinforce a kind of hyper-individualism that progressive proponents are actually trying to fight with this kind of measure. My concern is that it could further atomize us. And this goes back to my idea of guaranteed income or basic income and. To go back to Charles Taylor, who I mentioned before, he captures an element of my fear in his famous Massey lectures on the malaise of modernity. I imagine most people in the room have experienced a sort of malaise in modern life. A decline, perhaps, a lack of richness or fullness, pressing existential questions that sort of interfere with your day-to-day. And I think freeing up one's time to put towards other pursuits besides our jobs and wage labor might actually relieve this, but not if it means rolling back or not scaling up those things we do together, collectively as a community. So I say, let's not forget protections for all those in the labor market. We need strong unions, collective bargaining, good benefits, and fair working conditions for everyone. We need government-administered programs like the CPP, or public pensions, expanded. And we need accessible unemployment insurance. We need a national child care program, desperately. We need a national pharmacare program. The Canadian Medical Association today lended its voice to that idea. A colleague of mine at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has pointed out that what a basic income can't cover, the kind of community programs for those with drug addictions and facing mental health situations that we as a community ought to be doing. So the Broadbent Institute, where I work, will continue to advocate and forcefully for all of these ands in this election year. What I'm trying to get across here is that the basic income must be a baseline, not the end in itself. We cannot lose sight of these other pressing fights. Thank you.